Welcome once again to TimeXtender Tuesdays. Over the past few weeks, we've gotten quite a few requests from different customers and partners on how to set up the dynamic row-level security in the TimeXtender semantic layer. So I'm going to be talking about that today. What are the different concerns? What are the different ways to address security, how to set it up, and how it works in multiple different ways. So let's go ahead and dive right in. First and foremost, what is row-level security, right? So in the semantic layer, primarily we're talking about analysis services here. We're not going to go into how it functions with the other endpoints. We're in this TimeXtender Tuesdays episode, we're going to talk about analysis services specifically. So when talking about that technology, what do we need to consider? Well, first of all, when users are accessing their dashboards, it's important that they only see the data that they're allowed to see. We don't want them seeing other people's sensitive information, so we can set up security to allow for that. The nice thing about doing this in analysis services is the security is dynamic, so it actually filters out to other areas of the model, of course, because in analysis services Tabular, all the tables are related to one another. They're all integrated. So we're going to look at doing this for an organization. The organization we're going to be looking at today, some of you might even be familiar with it. We're going to be taking a look at an organization known as the Dunder Mifflin Paper Company. So I thought this would be fun. Maybe some of you out there recognize some of these names, some of these characters. So in this organization, if you're not familiar, at the top we have the Chief Financial Officer, David Wallace. In the middle, we know as the world's best boss, Michael Scott, who is the Regional Manager for the Northwest Territory. And then down along the bottom, we have our different sales reps. We have Jim Halpert, who's a sales rep. We have Stanley Hudson, who's a sales rep. And then we have Dwight Schrute, who is the assistant to the regional manager. The IT department refused to recognize that title, and instead they just put him with the other sales reps and included him in the sales rep group. So we're going to go ahead and look at identifying each of these different roles and how we can set up security for these different individuals. First of all, let's look at defining access control and how we would go about doing that. We can see here on the left-hand side, we have users, couple different users we have here, David Wallace, Michael Scott. We are going to recognize these as individuals users in our setup. We could include them in groups as well. However, our groups, the group that we're using are the sales reps in this case. All right, so we're going to look at the sales reps as a group, and we're going to define security on groups for the sales reps specifically. We'll define security for David Wallace and Michael Scott as individual users. So you'll get to experience the different ways of defining security for these different kind of access layers. And then in the center here, we have roles. So once we have users or groups, we need to assign them to roles. Right here we have the executive role. David Wallace is in there. He is the Chief Executive Officer or the Chief Financial Officer, but he is on the executive level there. We have the regional managers, and we know Michael Scott is a regional manager. And then we have the sales team. So the role here is for sales, and the sales reps group is going to be assigned to the sales role. And then finally, we have the access permission. So once we have our roles established, we need to define in these roles, how do users access data, or how should they access data? So we look at here in the executive role, we're just going to say that David Wallace has access to all data, right? We want to give him, he is in the executive team. There's no reason he shouldn't be able to see everything that's in there. So we're going to put him in there and just give him access to all of it. I'll show you how to do that. We also have the regional managers. So we have Michael Scott, who is the manager of the Northwest Territory. So we want to make sure he only has access to see the information for the sales reps in the Northwest Territory. He doesn't need to be looking at bonuses and commissions for all of the other sales reps across the different departments or different regions in the company. Just needs to look at his region. And then, of course, we have finally the individual sales reps. They need to see their own performance, their own bonuses, their own commissions, but they shouldn't be allowed to see the bonuses and commissions of the other sales reps. So we're going to look at how we're going to set that up in TimeXtender. So here's some steps. We're going to look at adding roles. Of course, we're going to create these roles, add our individual people into the roles. We're going to add row level security setup to the role. And then, of course, we're going to deploy and execute all of this. These are the steps to implement row level security. I would say a pre-step, step 0 even, is to plan it out. Plan out how you're going to establish it. Put it up on a whiteboard. Discuss it with your team. You can use a diagram similar to this to kind of map that out and help you to establish that. And then that'll be a lot easier to implement that in TimeXtender after the fact. All right, so let's jump into TimeXtender and let's see how we can set this up. All right, so here in TimeXtender, as we can see, I have a data warehouse. In my data warehouse, I have salesperson, sales territory, sales order details, and all of these have been mapped into this semantic model here, okay? So in this semantic model, I have customers, I have salespersons, and then I have sales order details, okay? And then I finally have an endpoint here that's pointing to Analysis Services Tabular. So this is my Analysis Services Tabular endpoint, all right? Right now, I don't have any roles, I don't have any security setups. All right, so looking back quickly at our diagram, if we remember, we have the Chief Financial Officer, David Wallace. He wants to get access to data. So we have our dashboard creator, created this new great dashboard for us to look at performance of our different sales managers and their sales teams. So you can see in this dashboard, there's a lot of data. We can see all of the different sales managers, their performance year over year. We can also see here sales amounts by territory. Oh, sorry about that. We can also see here sales amounts by territory. We can also see customers of the different sales reps. So if you click on a sales rep, it's of course going to filter down on their specific customers. So these sales reps can look at all of their individual customers and know, what are these customers buying, so on and so forth. What we don't want is, as I mentioned before, we don't want sales reps seeing other sales reps bonuses, sales quotas, and all of this. This is private to them. We also only want the sales managers for a specific region, for example, the Northwest region, to see the information for the sales rep in that region and not sales reps in other regions. So let's go ahead and set up security based on that. Now, David Wallace reached out to his BI and analytics developers, and he's like, I heard you have a great new dashboard showing sales manager performance. I want to have access to that. So he goes in and he opens Power BI as David Wallace, of course. So let's go ahead and open Power BI as David Wallace. So it always opens on my other screen here. So I'm going to put this in here. This just means, the dot just means local host. Of course, you typically want to put in, if you're using Active Directory, you want to put in the domain name of your Active Directory. And then I'm going to type in here, David Wallace. All right. And then, of course, the password. So we'll open Power BI as David Wallace, and let's see what his view of this dashboard actually looks like. Okay, now that I've opened Power BI as David Wallace, I want to open my report, Sales Managers. So let's go ahead and do that. I open the report. Let's see what happens. What will I see? All right, so unable to connect. We encountered an error while trying to connect. Details. Either the user, my PC David Wallace, does not have access to the sales manager database, or the database does not exist. Well, we know the database exists. We created it in TimeXtender. The likely scenario here is that David Wallace does not have access to sales manager's database. So let's go ahead and give him access. So let's go into TimeXtender. And what we need to do here is we have an endpoint. We have a server connection. The next thing we need to do is we need to assign David Wallace to a role. So we need to create a role first. So I'm going to add a role. I'm going to call this executives. All right. We'll just use local role members. You can divide this up for different, if you're using multiple environments, you might have different roles, different use cases for your different environments, and you can adjust that accordingly. I'm not going to go into that in this session. We're just going to look at local, but you can switch that up if you need to have different access for different environments. So I'm going to add a user here, and of course, we're looking at David Wallace. And the naming convention we're using for our usernames here across Active Directory in this case is just the full name without a space in the middle. So I'll hit check names, and then it comes up with my PC. So the domain, this is just my PC. I'm using local users instead of Active Directory. So that's my example, but this works the same with Active Directory as well. So putting in my PC / David Wallace as the name, and we can see that name right in there. So David Wallace is now part of the executive's role in my model, okay? So now he's part of the role. Now it's important to understand here, I have not yet set up what's called a row level security setup that's attached to the executive team. This means that the executive team, the members of this role, can access this report without any security, okay? Very important to understand that with analysis services, that's how that works. So if you're adding users into a role in that model, those users will have access to the entire report without any security listed, all right? So if you haven't added users to the role, as you saw, they can't access it. But once you add users to the role, let's see what happens. I've added the user to the role. Let's go ahead and deploy and execute the model. All right, execution is done. Let's go back to Power BI and let's retry. Okay, so look at that. We have some data loaded in. That is beautiful. All right, let's... Great. So David Wallace now has access to the entire dashboard without any security. He can see all regions, all territories, all sales reps, and that's exactly what we wanted. Fantastic. So David Wallace reached out to, of course, Michael Scott, and he called him on the phone. And he's like, hey, Michael, have you heard about the new Power BI dashboard we have for the sales managers? And Michael says, well, no, I haven't. What is it, and how can I get access to it? So of course, they reach out to the Power BI manager and they say, well, Michael Scott needs to have access to it, but he is not allowed to see all the other sales reps in all the other regions. He should only see the sales reps in the Northeast territory. So let's figure out how we can do that again in TimeXtender. So looking back to TimeXtender, let's pull that open. As I mentioned before, first thing we need to do is we need to create a role and ensure Michael Scott is added into the role. So we're going to use a new role for this one. I'm going to add another role. And for this one, we are going to call that role regional managers. All right. Regional managers. Just going to use local again, and I'm going to add users in here. Check names, Michael Scott. Okay, again, my PC. You can see how this is listed. This is important to know because when we go in to set up role level security setup, we need to specify the domain in here. Okay, Click OK. We have that again, the domain / the username. So we'll click OK. We now have Michael Scott added to a role called Regional Managers. So what we need to do next is we need to set up a row level security setup. Now this is based on values in a table. We define which values in a specific field that user should have access to. In this case, we want Michael Scott, or the regional manager's role, Michael Scott, in there. We want him to have access to any territory with a name Northeast. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. What we can do, we've opened up the salesperson table. You want to right click on the field and click Add Row Level Security Setup. This is going to examine that table, look through all of the values in here, and it's going to populate those values on the left. I'm going to create a name here. I'm going to call this territories. So that's my row level security setup based on territories. All right, so this one is, as I mentioned, we want Michael Scott to have access to Northeast. And there's a couple different ways to set this up. We can do this manually or dynamically. In this case, I'm going to do it manually. We'll look at dynamic for the sales reps. All right, Northeast, and then we get to type in a roll number. So we want to type this in. It's got to match exactly how we saw it there in the roles. Again, with the domain name first. So myPC / Michael Scott. All right, so I'm going to add that member, and we want to select Northeast and Michael Scott, and we want to click Add. So this is going to tell us that Michael Scott is going to have access to any territory, access to the data where the territory is listed as Northeast. Now we could click multiple regions here. We could click multiple users here and click Add. And then again, you'll have access based on those multiple different regions. In this case, Michael Scott should only have access to Northeast. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. I'm going to deploy and execute that. And while that's running, I'm also going to open Power BI Desktop as Michael Scott. So we can preview the dashboard as if we were Michael Scott. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to put Michael Scott and his password, and we'll click OK. So we'll log in as Michael Scott, and let's see what he sees on this dashboard. All right, so Power BI opened here as Michael Scott. Let's go ahead and open our sales manager's report. And let's see what Michael Scott can see on his dashboard. Okay, so we see here that incorrectly, Michael Scott has access to everything. And this is important. There's a reason why this is, and I wanted to show you this. So we have to go into TimeXtender. This is a very important step. We need to make sure that we do not skip, because otherwise people will have access to data you might not want them to. All right, so we assigned the row level security setup. We told in this, we said Michael Scott has access to certain values. Right in here, Michael Scott, we know that that's set up correctly, and we have the role. But what we did not do is we did not assign the setup to the role. So that's something we need to do here. So we need to right click, you go to roles, right click on the setup, go to roles, and assign the setup to a role. So we're going to assign this to regional managers, because otherwise TimeXtender wouldn't know which role to establish this security setup to. And then we need to assign a role to an endpoint. So we know that this role, regional managers, is assigned to sales managers, the endpoint. Okay, so now we've made those connections. We can see them right in here on the role. We have the endpoint is selected. We have the security setup is selected. Okay, so let's go ahead and deploy and execute once again. All right. Now let's reopen Power BI and we'll refresh. Again, this is Power BI opened as the user Michael Scott. Now we've assigned the row level security setup. We've then related that to the role and the role to the endpoint. Now, if we're logged in as Michael Scott, what do we see? We can see the sales reps that are in our territory and only the sales values for that specific territory, Northeast. So this is pretty cool. We can go through as Michael Scott. We can see the performance of these different sales reps, how they're doing, and we can go through and do that. Now, what happens? Of course, Michael Scott comes out to the office and he makes a big announcement. New announcement, everybody. We have a new Power BI dashboard. We're moving to data-driven insights, and I want everybody to have access to this data to make data-driven decisions. All right. So Michael Scott is super happy about this, and of course he calls up the BI and analytics director and he says, "Hey, I need all of my sales reps to have access to this dashboard. Very important, but they cannot see each other sales reps information. So we don't want Jim Halpert to be looking at Dwight Schrute's sales quotas, commissions, and bonuses, so on and so forth. So we want these to be secure. So when they open it up, they should only see their own information. Well, as we saw before, there's a lot of users. How are we going to go through and do this? Do we need to define a rule for every single person? What are we going to do? So let's go into TimeXtender and let's figure that out. For this, we can use the dynamic row level security setup by using information in a table. All right. So here I'm going to do, as the first step always is to create that role. So we're going to create the role, and instead of using a specific person or individual, I can use an Active Directory group. So this role I'm going to call sales, and I'm going to add users and or groups. Really, it's just looking through Active Directory. You can see users, groups are built-in security principles. And then I'm going to type in the name sales reps. I have a group with all of my sales reps in this group. Hit check names. Okay, it recognized that group. Good. Click OK, and now we have that. So this is going to include all users that are in the group, the Active Directory group, sales reps. Great. So we'll click OK. Now we have our role called sales. The next thing we want to do is we want to define a row level security setup and apply that to sales. So let's take a look at that. So for full name, right, we have all of these individuals. Do we want to go through and add in all these, there's like 15, 20 users and have to update those all the time anytime somebody joins or leaves? No, that's going to be challenging. So what we can do is we can use this option, the dynamic row level security, where we can read from a table. So with this, we can actually pull a table from our data warehouse and use that to define the values and the matching members. So if you remember back to this setup when we assigned Michael Scott to Northeast, it added a value in here. So we have, or a row in here. So we have this table, values and members. So if we have a data set that lists all the values and then all the matching members that should access those values, we can simply just use that data set to apply security. Now, there's a number of different ways we can do this. We can fill this out on Excel spreadsheet, right? We can bring that in as a data source, and then that way users can update that Excel spreadsheet anytime they need to update the security for their analytics dashboards, right? Another way to do it is just connect it to a dynamic table. All right, so that's what we're going to do here. We're not going to use Excel. We're actually going to use a dynamic table in our data warehouse to set this up. All right, so let's take a look at that. It'd be best to use, we know all the values that we want are in this full name table. And we also know that our usernames are based on the full name. We have a very specific naming convention. So it's first name, last name without the space. And of course, as I mentioned here, we need to include the domain in that as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit the salesperson table. I'm going to add a field here. We're going to call this username. And this is going to be text, and we'll make it 150 just so we make sure there's enough room in there. And it's possible that you could even connect to Active Directory, your Active Directory instance, and then pull in this information directly and use that as well. In this case, I have a list of my sales reps' names, and I know my naming convention, so I'm just going to make those changes here. So I have username right in here. So what I want to do is the username, as we know, is the same as the full name, just without the space and with the domain provided there. So I'm going to add this in here, and we can drop in a transformation. I already have this typed out, so I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste this right in here. So we have, first of all, separate this out here. We have the domain, which is my PC / plus. This is a way to concatenate values in SQL. The replace function. So we're gonna, and this is taking that full name field, replacing a space with a blank, right? So it's just removing the space between the first and last name. All right, so this transformation is going to transform the full name into usernames. Let's go ahead and deploy and execute that table and see what that looks like. Okay, great. So that finished up. Let's preview that, and let's make sure the usernames look right. Scrolling over to the far right, we know this field is right at the end. Okay, look at that. We have all the usernames right there for us. That's fantastic. So when Jim Halpert accesses using this username, he's going to see the rows with the full name of Jim space Halpert. Fantastic. So let's close that up. Go back here to our analysis services or semantic layer. And here we have full name. I'm going to add row level security setup. We are going to make this dynamic. In this case, I'm going to call this individuals, right? Because these are the individual sales reps accessing their individual information. And here I'm going to use salesperson. We know that the values is, of course, full name. This is what's got to match the values in the data we're filtering on. And the all values field, you can look at this tooltip here. This is essentially what row in the table is going to indicate this person should access all values. And in this case, I'm just going to put in all. It's a pretty standard nomenclature there. And then the members, which field is identifying the members that should be accessing, the people that are in the role that should be accessing it. And of course, these are the usernames, right? And then in this one, I'm going to use the role members. And then if there were anything in the table that said specific role members, that's identifying all role members, or specific values that said all, it would mean they have access to all the values. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and click OK. And remember, can't skip the important step. Individuals, this row level security setup needs to be assigned to the role of sales. And sales, of course, needs to be assigned to the endpoint sales managers. And then, of course, we can just verify in here that both of those are checked. And it looks like they are. Great. Let's go ahead and deploy and execute that. And again, while that's running, we will open Power BI as one of the sales reps. I'm going to go ahead and use Jim Halpert as our example here. So if you shift right click on a .exe or a shortcut, you can run it as a different user. And that's what I'm doing here. It's this little trick. Shift right click. Okay, so we're going to do, again, Jim Halpert. We know our naming convention is without the space. Click OK. Great. Looks like our model was deployed and executed. Now we're just waiting on Power BI to open. Okay, Power BI is open. Let's go ahead and open our Sales Managers report. Again, running Power BI as Jim Halpert, which is one of the sales reps. And let's see how this looks. Okay, look at that. So we have our same dashboard now filtered down to the specific user. I signed in as Jim Halpert, and I only see Jim Halpert. So this is very powerful, especially if you have very large teams with a lot of different names. If I were to sign in as another one of these names, of course, it would just filter down as that specific name. So I'm only seeing the sales amounts for the customers for Jim Halpert here. As you can see, all of these numbers and these values are different now, filtered down to that specific sales rep. So again, we'll do a quick review. First thing that you want to do here is define your users, define your groups in Active Directory. And then in TimeXtender, in your semantic model, you're going to create your roles, add those users or groups into those roles. And then you're going to set up your access permissions on the field level. So pick a field that you actually want to filter on, which values in that field you want to actually filter on. You can use the manual setup where you're defining specific usernames each time, or you can use the dynamic setup that we just showed where you're actually looking at data in the data warehouse. This can be from an Excel spreadsheet or dynamically from a table. And then you can use that to define the access control for analysis services. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate you keeping up with us over this time, and I hope these are helpful for you. Please don't hesitate to reach out in the comments, ask any questions that you might have. We are going to be putting links into the description of the video as well to ensure that you have access to all the resources to be able to replicate this on your own. Again, thanks so much, everybody, and until next time, have a great one. Bye-bye.